prazer, nesse momento, convidar o professor Karthik Ramanna, professor de Business and Public Policy na Blavatnik School of Government da Universidade de Oxford. Professor.
Well, thank you all so much for being here, and I'd like to welcome you to the Blavatnik School of Government. The Blavatnik School is in its 5th year now. The MPP program, the Masters in Public Policy, is in its 5th year now and was created with the vision of improving the quality of government across the world. We're living in a particularly interesting time for government, for public policy, for capitalism, and for democracy across the world. And the vision of the Blavatnik School was to create a convening space where people from all over the world who have a passion, an interest, a commitment to improve the quality of government would come together to form and to forge ideas for the future. So that's what we're here to do. Before I get started, I just want to thank a few people and alert you to a few things about the school, its mission, as well as acknowledge some people who were responsible for the school's presence in Brazil. And I think first and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge the gracious contributions of the Lehman Foundation to the Blavatnik School. The Lehman Foundation helps us bring every year a number of wonderful students from Brazil and other parts of Latin America, and that's a very important part of our mission. It's a very important part of what it is we want to do, and it helps us have a really powerful presence. One of our students from Brazil is right here in the audience, so well, there you go, Joao, thank you. And so I just want to acknowledge how important the Lehman Foundation is to that effect. The second, Lehman Foundation also helps us bring together to the school every year a remarkable group of practitioners. And so also in the audience today is one of our visiting Lehman Fellows of Practice. And if you are aware of some senior practitioner who is looking to take some time off, a sabbatical, either for a term or for a year, and spend time here at Oxford and help contribute to the mission of the school, please do get in touch with us. We're always looking for really inspiring Lehman Fellows from Brazil, and so that's a really important part of our mission. And next year, the theme of the Lehman Foundation's visiting fellow is people who improve the quality of management within government. So we're particularly interested in folks who have a background in improving management and in motivating and inspiring people in the public sector. So that's our emphasis for next year. The school is looking for other ways in which to deepen its ties to Brazil and to Latin America, and so this opportunity we have here today is a way for us to connect with you about our mission and about our interest in Latin America and in Brazil in particular. So if you find other ways in which, or have other suggestions through which you have an interest in which the school will be able to advance its presence and its mission in Brazil, please do reach out to us. We have a number of our friends of the school, alumni, students who are in the audience will be with you all day. So very much looking forward to those connections. With that, let me tell you a little bit about this magnificent building. I've had a chance to interact with some of you in the coffee break before we began, and there were a number of very interesting questions about the building. So let me tell you a little bit about the building, just because it's certainly a reflection or a metaphor for the strategy of the school. So the building was created by the architects Herzog de Meuron, who are famous for building the Bird's Nest in Beijing and the Tate Modern in London. This, of course, is perhaps their most spectacular piece of work, certainly a very new part of their collection. And the building was commissioned with an eye toward the school strategy, which is improving the quality of government and improving the practice of government. And one of the central themes in this is the importance of transparency in government. Those of us who are interested in serving government and improving government recognize an importance that at the end of the day, we are accountable to the people who put us there. And so the prolific use of glass in the building is a manifestation of the importance of transparency in government. And that's really sort of where the architect was motivated by. And reflects our strategy. One of the reasons why the building is circular is, again, a reflection of our strategy, which is to be small, elite, but very effective. By elite, we don't mean elitist, but we do mean that we want to curate every year in our Master of Public Policy program 120 of the most inspiring people who are going to change government over the next 2 decades, so the next 3 decades. And by building a circular building, we effectively send a signal that we're focused on the outside, we're focused on bringing people from the outside within, but we're not focused on, expanding rapidly, or we're not focused on sort of building sort of a mass production model, but rather we'd like to work with, again, 120 of the most impactful people who are changing government every year, and create a community for them here that lasts them not just for the year, but for the rest of their lives. So that's an important part of the mission. The central atrium, for those of you who are familiar with Oxford, knows that every Oxford college has at its core a quadrangle. And so the architect was looking for a way to reflect that quadrangle in the design of the building. And this central atrium that soars 6 stories up into the heights of Jericho was created with that vision. It was created with the vision of creating an open space where everyone can convene. And again, everyone can see what is happening around the building. An important theme, we think, for our students and for our alumni and for every member of our community. We hope that as we educate for future cabinet ministers, future governors, future presidents, future judges in this school, we get them used to the idea of transparency by putting them in this building that is, in some sense, a temple to the importance of transparency in government. So that's just a little bit about the building and about the school. Let me say a little bit about your mission today, which is about reframing systems. And this is an issue, again, that is of deep interest and importance to the school. As we look at the world today, and we look at the quality of democracy and capitalism across the world today, more people born since 1980 in developed countries, countries like the United States, which is my home country, countries in Western Europe, as well as in fairly mature democracies like Brazil. More people in these countries born after 1980 think that democracy and capitalism are not essential to the future of a good society. Now, we can have our debate about capitalism, but certainly the trend about democracy is particularly worrisome. If people don't believe, people in developed democracies, for instance here in the United Kingdom, don't believe that democracy is essential to the foundations of a good society, that suggests that schools of leadership, such as this, have actually a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do in creating a culture where leaders are actually serving people. Where leaders are actually delivering on the promises that governments were elected to keep. So there seems to be a moment of deep introspection for not just the community of schools of government, but also for a wider community of public leaders in the world. In fact, if you look at what has happened to returns to labor across the distribution of human capabilities in society. So if you were to plot, for instance, the way human beings are endowed with, certain natural capabilities. Some people are just born, born into luxury or comfort, or born with a particularly a strong mental sense of competence. The returns to labor are increasingly becoming right skewed. And what that means is that unless you find yourself at about the 80th percentile of the distribution of natural endowments, of the distribution of human endowments in a population, it's very hard to see yourself being or seeing your living conditions improve over the context of your lifetime. Now, that's a very, very serious trend that's emerging in part because of the structure of democracy and in part because of the structure of capitalism or capitalist societies that democracies have created. So if you're looking at this trend and you're looking at the fact that the returns to labor are becoming increasingly right-skewed. So unless you're born into a situation of great luxury or born into great intelligence, your lot in life is increasingly compromised. It becomes very important for us to think about why this is happening and what we can do to solve this. So there are, of course, a number of reasons why this is happening, some of which are entirely driven by the progress of human technology. So, obviously we're at a transformative point in the structure and organization of the role of technology in society. Perhaps not since the Industrial Revolution have we seen this kind of shift. What has happened effectively with the information revolution is that unless you have this kind of natural innate ability to contribute at the highest levels of, say, for instance, being a coder or, say, for instance, being someone who's able to create value or content through the information infrastructure, you find yourself in an increasingly difficult position to find or to improve your lot in life. So certainly technology is playing a very important role in this. But there are also non-technological reasons why we're seeing this sort of stagnation, if you must, this great stagnation in opportunity across the last 3 or 4 decades. One of these is globalization. And globalization is a really sort of hot button issue in this school today, in part because we have 120 students from 70 different countries. As you would imagine, we're a very, very global school. And we believe deeply in the importance of human interaction across different jurisdictions. But globalization has created its shares of winners and losers. And it has created a disproportionately large accumulation of wealth and income in a disproportionately small segment of society, the global winners. These are people, for instance, like me, who could be at home in Boston, Massachusetts, or here in Oxford, England, or in Beijing, or in Bombay, or in Sao Paulo, where I was a couple of years ago. There's this global elite, which many people in this room are part of, who have truly benefited from globalization, who see globalization as a very powerful force, motivating force in society. But of course, globalization has created this large community of people who are being left behind. So as a school of leadership, as a school of public service, we have to think about how it is we reframe the systems of globalization to address this issue. The second factor here that's really important is immigration. Again, there is, like the folks in this room and like me, a globally mobile cohort of individuals who might be born in one country, citizens of 2 or 3 other countries, go work in a third country. For us, globalization and the free flow of labor are unmitigated goods. But for a vast majority of people across the world, for instance, if you happen to come from a working class community here in Birmingham, England, or if you happen to come from a working class community in, say, for instance, Michigan or Wisconsin in the United States, immigration has proved to be a deeply disruptive force. It has introduced a level of competition in the labor force that is unsustainable for their quality of life, for their standards of living. And again, as a school of leadership, as a school of public service, it's incumbent on us to reframe systems of immigration to think about how we might address this challenge. The third is the issue of what we call structural corruption, which is around the design of the rules of the game in the system. This is an issue that I understand from my last visit to Brazil is a very hot button topic in Brazil right now. Structural corruption involves everything from the fact that the very wealthiest people in society often pay the lowest tax rates compared to, say, middle-class folks, to things that, for instance, if all of us hold savings in the stock market, or many of us might hold savings in the stock market, but if you and I were to trade in our stocks in exchanges, we'd pay a higher fee per trade than the very wealthiest people in society because of the way the fees are arranged and because of the way access to capital markets is arranged in different exchanges around the world. So in small ways across the way the rules of the game have been structured, whether it's something as simple as access to capital markets, whether it's something as profound as a tax rate, the rules of the game have been subverted or engineered in a way that the very wealthiest often end up with the best deal. And in particular, the middle class end up with the worst deal on that front. So as you start looking at these various factors like globalization, like immigration, like structural corruption, these become really important challenges for how we might reframe the system, how we might reframe the structure of democracy and the structure of capitalism in our various societies. Of course, the Blavatnik School is not just about problems, it's most importantly about solutions. So one of the things that we're encouraging our students to do here is to think about various solutions. Now, none of these solutions might be perfect, but each of these solutions goes a long way in addressing the fundamental issues. So some solutions that are being debated in the school at this very moment include issues like a universal or an unconditional basic income. Should all individuals in society, regardless of their lot in life, be afforded a living wage to allow them the basic access to human dignity in a developed society? So this is an issue, obviously, we have a lot of debate within the student body, a lot of debate within the faculty about whether we should have some sort of unconditional basic income. One potential solution. There are also debates about whether we should have more consumer-focused capitalism, for instance, thinking about whether governments should actually and actively engage their citizenry to buy local products. This is certainly happening in many parts of the world already today. And, for instance, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, is now encouraging this in the context of the United States. To what extent is this a good idea? To what extent is this something that might be very dangerous? These are the sorts of debates we need to have when we're designing good public policy. The third really important solution here is around the quality of leadership. One of the great failures of leadership over the last 30 years has been, in fact, universities. Elite universities like Oxford or Harvard or MIT, and I pick on these three because I've been involved with these three over the course of my career, but certainly other elite universities as well, have over the last 30 years moved away from talking about morals and ethics and values to embracing a sort of secularism which de-emphasizes the importance of ethical education and de-emphasizes the importance of leadership education in the classroom, particularly when we assemble the extraordinary cohort of individuals that we do here every year. Perhaps it's incumbent on us to return to a more moral form of education. This is, again, a very heated debate within the school about whether we should take a more normative view of education, whether we should advance a more normative prescription of what is right, what is expected of leaders. As you can imagine, not everyone agrees because not everyone agrees on the same normative system. But these are important debates that universities ought to be engaged in. So I'm going to stop there, just laying out some ideas in terms of what might be the causes for us to have to rethink or reframe systems, as well as some potential solutions that the school is debating right now. Now, again, none of these solutions might be worthwhile, but the importance of the university is to raise these questions, to raise these topics, so that we have some engagement, particularly with folks like you. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to ask questions. If you want to ask questions about the school, certainly about this magnificent building, or about the substance of any remarks that I've made before I turn it back over to our hosts. So are there any questions? Yes?
I actually think we do have you put the problems very well in terms of the problems.
Oh, just one moment. I think there's a mic that has to come through because of the streaming.
Okay.
Sorry.
Do you want me to speak in English?
Yeah, yes. That certainly helped me.
Okay. You certainly put the problems very well that we are facing in terms of government, in terms of democracy, etc. I'm going to put what came up to me. You certainly put very well the problems that we're facing in terms of government, in terms of democracy, in terms of wealth in our society at the moment. My question to you is, how do you square the idea of having an elite number of students, of an elite group of globalized students in society, with finding the solutions for the world who are left out?
That's a great question, and I'm so glad you asked that, because that's something that we're struggling with every day. I think one of the most important things that we can do with this community here is to build two important skills. One is active listening, and the other is empathy. So whether we like it or not, there's been enormous research that's happened in behavioral sciences, particularly over the last 20 years, around how we all tend to see the world through the lenses that are our own experiences. This is what my former colleague Max Bazerman refers to as moral blind spots. So we all have our own moral blind spots, and we tend to view the world through the lenses of our own experiences. One of the things that assembling a remarkably diverse community that we try to do here does is open our eyes to the fact that the same problem that might look very clean to you, that might look very black and white to you, is incredibly gray when viewed from a different set of experiences. So creating the sense of urgency around developing one's active listening skills and creating a sense of urgency around developing a sense of empathy, particularly among leaders, is really important. Now, there is, of course, a very vigorous debate to be had about do we ever need leadership in society, or can we have a completely leaderless society? Now, this is an issue that obviously we want to have a conversation about in the school, because it would have implications for our strategy. But at the end of the day, there are a number of decisions. For instance, in my own research, I study things around the design of financial regulation, particularly how minute rules and very technical rules, abstruse rules around financial transactions are structured in the economy. Now, these rules have enormous impact or implication for society at large. We're talking about trillions of dollars every day that might be traded under these rules. And this is your savings. These are our savings. Now, the kind of rules that we're talking about are not rules that, we can get sort of a democratic consensus to vote on, because they're very, very technical. They're very specialized. They require a great deal of education in order to understand. Usually, there's somewhere between 5 and 50 people in the world who truly understand them. When it comes to designing these sorts of technical rules, you really do need leadership. You really do need a group of elite individuals who are focused on doing the right thing. And that's really the mission of the school, which is making sure that when it is you get that opportunity to set the rules of the game for everyone else, because you have been endowed with the capacity, you've been endowed with the capability to understand those rules better than anyone else, you actually do the right thing. So that's an important part of our mission. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor, for such a brilliant presentation. I'd like to give my 2 cents on 2 things. First of all, the same globalization process that you addressed that has generated inequality challenge in a substantial part of the advanced world should not make us forget that overall globalization has been extremely good for poverty reduction in the world at large. We should keep in mind that this is fact. We both come from the World Bank. The World Bank collects information from all over the world, and the fact is more than 1 billion people moved up the poverty line. So it's not only an inequality story I'm not denying the challenge faced. What happened in the UK, in the US, almost happened in France, has a lot to do with it, but let's not lose sight that overall globalization has been good. Second point, obviously this leads to local and specific processes. Talking about inequality and the challenges of exclusion and so on, they take different shapes in Israel and Palestine, vis-a-vis Brazil, vis-a-vis what happens in France and elsewhere. And there is a role to be played by institutions like yours in enlightening young people who can be on the positive side on resolving the inequality issues in the local space. It's not a matter of global elites solving problems of poverty at large, because ultimately the challenges are to be faced on a specific base. But thank you very much.
Fantastic. And I agree with you on both those points, because globalization in particular, as you say, has lifted 1 billion people out of poverty in the last 30 years. Great. Are there any other questions about, and I'm happy to take some questions about the school and about the building, if you have any, but yes. So we got.
Hi, I'm Andresa, and I'm a postdoc here at the University of Oxford. So bringing the discussion to a more local context, I was wondering if you could tell us how the school deals with the fact that it generated an increasing level of housing speculation in this neighborhood of Jericho, making housing unaffordable for a lot of people here in Oxford. Thank you.
Yeah. No, this is and this is something that we had to be very careful about when we were building the school, because you know, as those of you who live in Oxford know, that real estate here is just, it's incredible. It's almost as expensive as London, and central London. We're talking about places like Chelsea and Kensington, and there's this incredible shortage of housing. And so one of the reasons why, in fact, we've capped the student size is in order to be able to manage our impact. That is our environmental impact on the community. And the university actually worked very closely with the school to ensure that enough housing was built to offset, particularly student housing was built to offset the conditions that might be created otherwise. So, in fact, and this is getting really local, but those buildings that were built along Port Meadow, student housing buildings were built along Port Meadow in part to address this issue of, you know, what kind of impact would a school like this have on the community. But certainly something we have to be. More broadly, one of the things that the school is very engaged in and is very much hoping to become even more engaged in is local government. Right? So engaging with the city of Oxford, engaging with the local community. After all, if we're a school of government, it's important that we're connected with local issues as well. Because as you pointed out, most of these issues are local, very much so. Okay, well, with that, I'm going to hand it over back to our organizers, and thank you very much. I hope you very much enjoy this wonderful opportunity.